Hi everybody, my name is Adam and I work for customs consultants Barbourne Brook. Consultants have been giving advice to major organisations for 30 years and more recently guiding firms to the Brexit implications on their business. The presentation that you're about to receive is just a 15-minute snapshot as of November 2020 on modelling the Brexit impact and mitigating these costs. To make this as pragmatic as possible, I'm going to outline how our clients are planning for the new regime. They are starting with an assessment of what the new regime looks like, modelling how it applies to them, and then identifying what actions they must take and implementing plans to mitigate any additional costs. So today we're going to cover what we know and what we don't know, applying what we know and assumptions to quantify impact, mitigation scenarios, and give you a checklist of practical things to take away. Hopefully some of you will listen to this, ticking off things you've already done. For others, this is probably a presentation that can provide you with a roadmap for action. But for everybody, the next few months are going to be bumpy and uncomfortable as we rely on government plans and systems to keep supply chains working. So what do we know about the new UK customs regime? Well, quite a lot actually, as it happens. We now have a UK tariff for 2021, and as such, we have classification codes and standard duty rates. There are some welcome duty rate reductions, there's some simplifications and removal of nuisance tariffs. We also know that the UK customs regulations are going to look like, excuse me, we also know what the UK customs regulations are going to look like, although the ink is very much wet on the page. Instead of a cut and paste of the EU rules into the UK, we move from 3 basic pieces of EU customs regulations into 28 pieces of UK law. Many of the principles are the same, but with some UK changes to ensure added complexity over the next few years while this all beds in. We know customs declarations will be needed and that these declarations will need commodity codes, origin and customs values against all of your exports and imports. There is good news on the VAT front in that all imports into the UK will be processed through the VAT return rather than require payment and subsequent recovery. This is not just for EU imports, but all imports and should provide worthwhile cash flow savings for all. Temporary customs simplifications. We know the UK is introducing a simplified process that could postpone the need to make full customs declarations for up to 6 months. Note they still need to be made, and many prefer the idea of making them at the time of import rather than going through the pain of keeping additional information in commercial records and digging it out and providing it to the HMRC at a later date. Some more good news is that existing customs authorisations such as duty relief schemes, by which I'm talking about inward processing, outward processing, customs warehousing and AEO accreditations will continue to be valid, but classification rulings, BTIs, will not. We also have a short list of free trade agreements that the UK will have in place, although we lose access to a much longer list as we leave the EU. There's still quite a few unknowns, and by that I mean whether the transition will be extended, whether we will have a free trade agreement with the EU, what other free trade agreements will have struck, if there are free trade agreements, what conditions will apply under these agreements, and whether the UK infrastructure will cope, given that roughly quadrupling the number of imports and exports subject to the regulation. There's no real time to wait for this. Actions take time and often need HMRC approval, so you need to make some educated guesses and assumptions, or you risk the inbound and outbound supply chain disruptions. 2 big outstanding questions are whether there will be an extension to the transition period and whether we will sign an FTA with the EU. And the truth is nobody knows, even at this late stage. Again, promising to be pragmatic, let's follow the money and take a look at what the odds that bookies are offering. The EU-UK transition arrangement extended beyond the 31st of December. Well, as it mentions below, it's 82% probability for no, as the bookies odds are implying, and we guess that it's not going to happen, so that's our view at the moment. EU and UK to sign an FTA. Obviously prior to the end of the year. Actually, the money at the moment is 73% probability yes. We think that this will happen, but its impact will be more limited than generally accepted. So in perceived wisdom, hope for the best and plan for the worst. So back to what our clients are doing. They are taking the current understanding, a state of play, and the knowns and unknowns from earlier. They are then applying this understanding to their own specific situation. They begin this by inputting their own key variables into a model. So the inputs that are going into this model are the current rest of world imports and exports customs data, movements to and from the EU, because both will attract duties and customs declaration costs, current customs planning authorisations, potential customs valuation issues, by which I mean royalties, tooling, research and development spend, etc., and contractual terms, including Incoterms to show who will be bearing the cost and risk, revision to historic numbers from purchasing and sales teams. And then this is giving the following outputs: the additional costs in the UK, additional costs in the EU, customs duty, customs declaration costs, other barriers, barriers that need to be removed, and obviously this is on a benefit versus cost basis. So we are seeing that sometimes the cost will outweigh the benefit, but actually more often than not, there's a strong business case for doing these sorts of mitigation strategies that I'm about to get onto. So mitigation is specific to each business. We've come up with hundreds of actions, but I'll just go through one tactic. Two big numbers that typically come out of modelling: the number of customs declarations and their associated costs, and the additional customs duty costs. The declaration costs will apply whether we have a FTA with the EU or not. Customs brokers typically charge around £40 per customs declaration, and there will be 2 on each movement from the EU to the UK or vice versa, which are the export declaration and the subsequent import declaration. So if a business is sending 100 packages per week to the EU, then they will typically incur costs of £468,000 each year. Note, there is a real shortage of customs brokers, so there's real potential for costs to increase. An obvious step to reduce the customs declaration cost is to consolidate or hub these movements. So rather than 100 per week, there could be 1 movement to the EU each day. Once imported, you could break the bulk and ship the consignments to customers. So based on these figures, the duty declaration savings would be £447,000 per annum. But some planning is needed to set up the mechanism for you to act as the importer to the EU and to account for the duty and import VAT, and to break the bulk and ship once the goods are received. As we're going to be outside the EU, you will need some sort of fiscal representation, or you will need to set up a permanent business establishment. The second big number coming out of Brexit modelling is new and often significant customs duty costs in the supply chain. These costs are more sensitive to whether there is a free trade agreement with the EU, but even if there is, please be clear that many movements will not qualify for tariff-free treatment because they do not originate in the EU or UK according to origin list rules in the FTA, or because it is impossible to get proof of where they originate, especially if goods are not brought from a manufacturer. If there's no deal, then this slide gives an example of how the costs can build up. So let me just talk you through this. So here we have product A being shipped into the UK at a value of 3.6 million. We also have product B, let's say, coming in from the United States at 1.6 million. So the duty cost at 6% and 4% gives a total duty spend for product A and product B of £289,000. Now, when product A and product B are manufactured or processed together, they give a finished product that is then shipped back out to the EU at a value of 6.2 million. So in this example, you will have a UK duty cost of £289,000 and an EU duty cost of £406,000, so a total duty cost of £695,000. Fortunately, there's something that can be done under current UK and EU regulations using 2 different duty relief schemes. A relief called inward processing can be used in the UK. This negates or removes the need to pay for customs duty on materials that are imported, processed and subsequently exported from the UK. So in this example, we have product A again coming in from the EU to the UK at 3.6 million. We have product B coming in from the US at 1.6 million, using inward processing relief because the product A and product B make a finished product that then gets shipped back out to the EU. the total duty suspended would be £289,000. So the inward processing savings in the UK in this example is £289,000. A relief called outward processing can then be used in the EU, and this allows us to deduct the value of the EU element, here product A, from the customs value of the finished product when it is imported back into the EU. Product A does not need to be EU originating, it just needs to be in free circulation in the EU. The use of outward processing relief brings customs values of the finished product down from 6.2 million to 2.5 million, and the EU duty is then charged on the net value. So instead of paying duty on 6.2 million, you will then pay duty on 2.5 million. So in this example, you will have outward processing savings of £240,000. So just from using inward processing, outward processing, the client will save £429,000. So just as promised, a few practical steps to be taken. If you fall into an importing, exporting business post-Brexit, you need to make sure you have a UK-issued URI and an EU-issued URI. Determine the customs elements, by which I mean classifications, origins, customs values, licensing requirements. Model the customs impact of Brexit. Agree with customers and suppliers who will be the exporters and the importers. Work out how customs declarations will be made. Are you going to use a customs broker or are you going to do it in-house? Identify and implement planning to reduce the impact. Apply for training grants. There's a HMRC grant available at the moment to give you training or to pay for the cost of training regarding making customs declarations post-Brexit. Don't forget the rest of the world imports. We want to, if you want to explore this further, you've got information available on the fully funded training. We are putting Brexit modelling projects together for clients and have been now for 2 years. Happy to take one-to-one meetings to discuss anything involved in this presentation or any of the project Brexit modellings that we've discussed. So my details are at the bottom here, adam@barbournebrook.co.uk. Look forward to hearing any questions you might have. Thanks very much.